The month of April has been dreaded by many, if not most, tax-paying citizens, as it is the month when they all register, file, and pay for their taxes.
Register, file, and pay.
But like it or not, it is important for everyone to pay their correct and true taxes. Under Section 2 of the Tax Reform Act of 1997, in order to provide for the needs of those under its jurisdiction and care, the government has to promote sustainable economic growth through the rationalization of the Philippine Internal Revenue Tax System.
All of us should pull our weight. We should do our bit, which is what the law requires, pay the right taxes.
Parati kong sinasabi, dalawang obligasyon ng tao. No? First, magbayad kayo ng tama. Second, bantayan nyo kung saan pumupunta yung buwis nyo. Hindi nyo pwedeng sabihin nyo, hindi nyo binabantayan, kaya ayaw nyo magbayad. Para sa akin, wala akong karapatan magreklamo ang isang tao kung hindi sila sumusunod sa batas. Di ba?
With the money collected from our taxes, the government uses these to build infrastructures such as ports, roads, and pedestrian footbridges, and provide services such as medical care and social needs. However, there are some people who still do not know how to register, file, and pay for their taxes.
They don't want to file, it's up to them. Then we will catch them and then we will file criminal case against them. They're supposed to be more intelligent because they can use the online facility, supposedly. But don't tell me they're not as intelligent as the other people who go through that same process. Kung ayaw, talagang maraming dahilan.
What are the steps for registering, filing, and paying for taxes? Who are required to file for their income taxes? If individuals do not file for their income taxes on time, what are the penalties they face? Good evening. You are watching Legal Help Desk on the Solar News channel. This show is about making the law work for you by giving legal advice on topics that matter to you. I'm Attorney Jimeno.
And I'm Attorney Nepomuceno. Tonight, we will discuss your legal rights on income tax returns, what you need to know on how to compute for your taxes, and what you need to do when filing for income tax returns.
Our guests for tonight are Commissioner Nelson Aspe of the Bureau of Internal Revenue, or BIR, and Attorney Noel Ortega, Professor and National Bar Reviewer in Taxation at the San Sebastian College, Recoletos. Good evening and thank you for being with us, gentlemen.
Good evening, DEPCOM, Nelson, and of course, Attorney Noel. Yeah. So this is very timely.
Yes, it's tax season again.
Tax season.
Yeah.
And so we decided that it'll be appropriate to be tackling taxes, in particular income tax. No? So I guess to first start off the show, obviously we're going to be filing our income tax returns on April 15th for those who haven't done it. Maybe we start off with the definition of income. Maybe DEPCOM, maybe we should start with that. I mean, how do we compute for income?
Yeah,
that
income that is taxable.
Taxable, yeah.
Well, generally, income is what we call a flow of wealth as differentiated from a return of capital. So in the case of those who are engaged in trade or business or practice of profession, income there to be taxable means the gross selling price less the cost of doing business. And that includes cost of sales and the operating marketing expenses, arriving at what we call net income. So for tax purposes, for income tax purposes, the individual who is a businessman is entitled into the so-called additional exemptions on top of the personal exemptions. But in the case of corporations, the net income is the one subject to the corporate income tax rate, save, of course, certain items which are excluded from income.
DEPCOM Nelson, I think one of the common misconceptions is that if you're not really employed with a company or wala kang employer, if this is not your normal business, that you really don't have to pay taxes. But can you clarify? For instance, if you're selling something, either over the internet or to a friend, and then you were paid for selling either your second-hand items or anything that or your services. For instance, you wrote something online for an internet or an online site. If you receive income from that, even if they're not your employers per se, do you have to pay income tax and report that to the BIR?
Well, anybody who derives income from any activity is required to file and pay an income tax as a general rule.
Now, does it apply for, let's say, ano yung minimum income, or I guess what we call a cap, no? There's a certain group of people whose earnings in a year don't reach a certain amount, and they don't need to file an ITR. Which ano yung amount na yun?
Yung pong hindi umabot doon sa personal exemption yung kanilang kinikita.
Magkano
Ang
po
personal
yung
exemption natin ay 50,000.
50,000.
per
So
person.
if, for instance, last year, someone earns 30,000 pesos, they don't have to file an income tax return.
Kung yung pong rule na yun ang gagamitin natin, yes, hindi na kailangan. Pero balikan natin, if that guy has been telling the world that he is engaged in trade or business or practice of profession, he still have the duty to file an income tax.
Regardless if his income does not reach 50,000
Yes,
pesos.
yes.
Attorney Noel, there are certain terms, no? Exemptions and then deductions. Can we, again, for those who are watching or not too familiar with tax accounting, can you explain how these exemptions and deductions work for their benefit?
Yes, when we talk about exemptions, well, this will still denote items of receipt, although the law would recognize them as excluded in the computation for the gross income. This we may exemplify by means of, like for example, the proceeds from life insurance. This will still denote the concept of
Income.
a flow of wealth coming to a person, but that is excluded, okay, by law. Okay, another example will be the
When you say
inheritance.
excluded, it's not included in the computation of income that's going to be taxable.
Yes,
All right.
yes.
Right.
Another example is the device or the gift that one receives. Okay, so that property or cash that is received, although a flow of wealth, okay, will not really be considered as taxable. Okay, that is expressly provided under our law. Well,
Not taxable as income, but
Not
taxable
taxable as
by
income.
as
As a donation.
donation.
as
Yeah.
a donation, but the person who will be made liable for that will not be the recipient of the gift, okay, or inheritance. It is another national tax. Okay, that will not, of course, be the subject.
So in
of
other words,
this.
for those people, for instance, that received inheritance last year and
Yes.
gained, like for instance, an additional 50,000 or 1 million pesos from an inheritance, they don't have to report that for income tax purposes.
No, it
but
is
they have to
excluded.
make sure they pay either real estate tax.
Yes.
Okay. And what about in terms of age? So if you earn income and you're below 18, you're still a minor, do you still have to file an income tax return? DepCom, Nelson.
Yeah, the mga child stars, yung mga child
Or
celebrities,
even those
even
who,
mga
sometimes
nagmamodel.
you have high school students who work during the summers or they write part-time for other
You have small
other
businesses,
Yes,
yeah.
and then they get income from that. Lalo na yung mga bloggers, for instance.
Yeah.
Will they have to file an income tax return?
Definitely, yes. We follow the same rules as that of the adults, but subject, of course, to a representation on the part of the minor. I think it's either the natural guardian, the parents, or a legal guardian.
Oh, that has to sign in their income tax
Yes,
return
yes,
as well.
yes.
Okay, so they need to get the assistance of either their parents or their legal guardian.
Yeah. Okay. So now, how do you compute? Just basic. No, I know that for companies, for example, and even certain individuals, it's a little bit confusing. No, you need an accountant for it. But generally, how does it go? Income, less exclusions. Like ano yung
Basic
flow,
at least.
basic calculation as they file their income tax return. Attorney Noel? Yeah.
Yes. Well, the system set in place here in the Philippines is one that is based on net income. So we really have to compute for the so-called net income. That is arrived at after determining the applicable deductions under our law. So for instance, if one is engaged in business, then we have to compute what is our gross sales. Then, as mentioned by DEPCOM earlier, we also need to determine how much is our cost of goods sold. Okay. Then, after having deducted the amount of the cost of goods sold,
So may
then
net
we
income
arrive,
kayo. That
okay?
you have a net income.
Well,
yeah.
gross income first, but
gross
there
income,
are
yeah, that's
other
right.
deductions available under our law that after claiming them, such as business expenses or depreciation expenses, okay, for those properties that are utilized in the business, then we arrive at the so-called net income.
And
That is.
the whole objective here is that you don't want to tax people on the expenses, di ba?
Yes,
di ba?
yes,
It's
precisely.
unfair naman to tax them because
Yes,
those were
yes, that's
expenses incurred in the course of business.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
And then, DEPCOM,
Yeah,
you have something
But
to
I,
add?
I have to make some sort of comments on that. That our taxpayers claiming expenses have to be very cautious, especially nowadays, considering that well, the advent of the requirement for the withholding of certain taxes on certain income payments, or we call them expenses or deductions for income tax purposes.
Just for an example,
For
rent-
instance, one is
expense?
paying rent or paying for, say, other services. If these are not subjected to the proper withholding taxes beginning 2013, at the time they are required to be subjected and the taxes to be remitted, the BIR upon audit will not allow these items, rentals and other expenses, to be declared as deductions.
A deduction.
And
In other words,
therefore,
it had to have been subjected to withholding
Withholding
tax.
tax,
Proper
okay.
withholding tax.
So to taxpayers out there, you have to be careful if you have other expenses that need to have withholding tax. For instance, if you're paying rent for your business or for your personal profession, you have to withhold taxes on that before you pay your lessor, so that the BIR will allow these expenses to be declared as expenses when you're computing for your income tax.
And also, I think it's worth pointing out that the expense has to be in the course of business. No?
Yeah.
Kasi
Yes.
it's not uncommon
Sigur-
where
yeah.
people will go to a restaurant and eat, and it's a family dinner or
And
family
they ask
lunch.
for the
They ask for a
receipt, no?
receipt.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
so-
it's not uncommon. I know it's quite it happens. I know it happens.
Yeah, but DEPCOM, Nelson, how does the BIR check this to ensure that the expenses are really
Are legit-
related to the business?
Legit business expenses.
well, the checking comes during the audit or examination of the books of accounts of the taxpayer.
Okay, so it can happen that if you submit all the requirements, the BIR can go to you and examine your records and they'll do an audit.
We're saying, though, that these receipts and other substantiation need not be submitted along with the income tax returns.
Now,
They
the-
should be preserved. I think it's already 10 years since
Yeah.
the preservation.
But
Okay.
DEPCOM, how important
So-
is it na the receipt, those business expense receipts are in the name of the company talaga? Kasi now, they're just issue, let's say, cash, diba? Pays cash, or minsan it's just the printed out receipt. Now, kunyari, sa gasoline station, it's just the printed out receipt. How important is it that it's named to the corporation?
I-advise po natin na it should be in the name of the purchaser or the company or party claiming the expenses.
What if you just have the printed out receipt? Will that be disallowed by the BIR in terms of proving that you have those expenses?
I think a number of POS machines now can print the name of the customer. But
So
if
if
it
it's
is
not
unable, there's a workaround there. As for the standard manual
OR.
receipt with the name of the buyer.
So if you don't have that, the OR in the name of the business or in your name, it's possible that the BIR will disallow
Will
that
disallow
expense.
that, yeah.
Now, just a quick one, since we're in the topic of deductions. There is such a thing as an optional deduction, diba, which is 40%. Attorney naman, would you like to clarify that? What is that optional deduction? I think it's 40%, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
at present it is fixed at 40% of one's gross income, or in the case of individuals, one's gross sales or gross receipts. Okay, that is the deduction allowed, okay, to taxpayers as well by the term itself, optional. Okay, it's another alternative in computing for one's net income. Of course, for those who are engaged in business, as we mentioned earlier, one can utilize the business expenses as deductions, but in lieu of this expense and other expenses that may be allowed, as deductions is the so-called optional standard deduction. Okay? This is a different way or method of computing one's net income. The good side about it is that one does not have to substantiate it.
No
So
more
you need
receipts.
not worry about the receipts,
Yeah.
okay? Because once you claim it at your option, of course, there's nothing more to prove because it is already provided in the law. The amount is anyway fixed at 40% of the gross.
Okay, so tip for viewers out there, if you've lost a lot of receipts, or as Depcom Nelson mentioned, that if you haven't had receipts issued in your name or in the name of your business, you might want to opt for the optional standard deduction, where you just deduct 40% of the gross, from the gross income in
Yes.
order to come up with the net income for purposes of taxation.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
you don't have to prove that with
Yeah.
receipts or...
If you lost a receipt,
Oo,
diba?
you don't go to audit.
May I
Yeah.
just advise
Yes.
that once the optional standard deduction is elected at the start of the year, it should be consistently followed until the end of the year.
Until the end of the year. All right. All right. Okay, so we have some questions from our viewers. Let's answer them with the help of our guests, starting with Gerard. I'm working in Manila and I computed for my monthly taxable income, which is at around 25,000. So that means my taxable income per year is at around 300,000. How much should I be taxed per month and at what percentage? I'm confused as to how I should compute it. I think this is a problem that most people have, no? Yung the rates and all that, especially some who don't really employ mga accountants. No? Maybe Attorney Noel, would you like to...
Yes, the
give a
computation for the income tax in the case of individuals is much more complicated compared to the computation for the corporate income tax, since under our law, the tax rates is graduated, okay, ranging from 5% to 32%.
Meaning the
depending.
higher the income, the higher the tax
base.
bracket.
Yes, the higher the rate will be. And there is a certain threshold amount by which you apply the corresponding tax return. So if the amount is somewhere there at around 300,000 pesos, then according to the schedule, we might apply there, I think, okay, at present for the first 250,000 pesos, there is this corresponding amount of tax liability. Anything in excess of that will be subjected to 30% to be added to that fixed amount, as we see the amount there in the schedule provided in our law.
So what would be, gentlemen, what would be your tip here for him to know the proper tax rate that will apply to him? What's the best reference?
The best reference is still the
Tax
income
code.
tax return.
Yeah.
Well, of course, the tax code is there for us, but we can see the rates of taxes and the corresponding amounts of liability per, like on the basis of the net income for the year in the income tax return itself.
What's a form number?
For him, it's Form 1700, but considering that the one who asked is an employee, I think we have a rule which we call the substituted filing of income tax return for and in behalf of taxpayers earning purely compensation income from one employer. He has got no other employment or source of income. And the tax is to be collected on a monthly basis. In that case, he's receiving 25,000 a month. We have to determine further whether he's single without any dependent or he's got
Or he has got a
additional
dependent. Kasi if you have dependents, you can file a...
For those
exemptions,
deductions.
deductions, no? Yes,
Yeah.
Simply have to consult the withholding tax table on a monthly basis.
All right.
Okay. So at
Okay.
least in his case, if he only has one employer, does not earn income from any other sources, your employer should have been withholding those taxes and will file the income tax return on your behalf.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the rule now, but the employer is the one
So
that
for several
files the
years.
ITR. Okay. So
Our next question
Yep.
is from Ira. Our company has yet to give us our copy of our ITR. We've requested for this since February and followed up on March. Now that it is already April, the company HR and accountant still hasn't given us any answers regarding our ITR. Can we file a case against them to the BIR or the Department of Labor and Employment? Will we be given penalties for the incompetency of our company?
Well, I'll ask the caller to proceed to your BIR district office or to my office itself at 924-3242, or to me at
Yeah.
0917
To DepCom Director.
557-2304.
Sorry, can you repeat that again? Sorry.
My official phone is 0917 557-2304, and the email address is nelson.aspe@bir.gov.ph.
Yan.
Please tell us the name of your employer, and we will simply advise that employer to go on with its obligation.
Right.
Ideally, those Form 2316, that's the Certificate of Income Tax withheld on employees, should have been distributed starting January 31, 2014, for the year 2013.
Bait ni DepCom Nelson, talagang
Oh.
sarili niyang mobile phone and his own email address. So he gave it out to anyone. So if you have concerns regarding not only ITR from your employers, yung income tax withheld, you can reach DepCom Nelson.
Alright. Yan, diretso yan. Okay. Now from Chloe, is it normal for companies not to give us copies of our ITR? I've been with my present company for 2 years, and they have never given us our ITR, though they have given us a copy of ITR 2316. With my previous employer, they gave us our ITR every year. I've also asked colleagues who have worked here as long as 5 years, and they have never received theirs either.
Parang related to the previous question. It seems
Yes.
employers not doing their job.
Let me answer. Actually, if the employee has been subjected to the substituted filing, there's no need for Form 1700 to be given to him by his employer. A copy of the Form 2316
Would suffice.
Yeah, would suffice.
Okay.
We have issued one says making this Form 2316 as acceptable for loan purposes, for clearance purposes, whatever. But some of them still want to have the formal return, and so our district offices are authorized to receive them if they so desire.
But if you were an employee and you want a copy of the Form 1700, meaning the annual income tax return from your employer, you can still demand this?
It's not the responsibility of the employer, but the responsibility of the employer is Form 2316, and if the employee wants a formal ITR form, then the employee shall file with the BIR.
So he can request it from the BIR.
Yes, or download it from our website,
Oh, what's the website, sir?
www.bir.gov.ph.
Okay, so for those of you out there, if you want to download your income tax returns Form 1700 filed by your employers, you can simply go to the website of the BIR, bir.gov.ph. We'll take a short break for now. We'd like to thank Attorney Noel Ortega for joining us tonight. Thank you, Attorney Noel. Legal Help Desk will return, so stay tuned. For many people, filing for their income tax returns can be confusing or scary, depending on how much they need to pay for their taxes. When registering and filing for your income tax returns, consider the following: your marital status, the number of dependents, your monthly contributions to SSS, PhilHealth, and Pag-ibig, allowances and other benefits you receive from your employer. Your marital status and number of dependents are important to note because the rates as to which the amount you pay on your taxes depend on it. S, ME, if you're single or married but have no dependents. ME1, S1, if you're single or married and have dependents. To compute for your taxable income, you need to add your monthly basic pay, overtime pay, holiday pay, and night differential if any, and deduct from this any tardiness or absences, as well as your contributions. After registering and filing for your income tax, proceed to the authorized agent bank with your respective BIR forms. Always remember to register, file, and pay your taxes correctly to avoid any penalties in the future. You're still watching Legal Help Desk on the Solar News channel with Commissioner Nelson Aspe of the BIR. We're also joined now by Attorney Romulus Tatel of Vinson's Chattel Law Office.
Good evening, Attorney Rom. So welcome to the show. Sige, let's talk about naman yung mga micro businesses. No? I mean, obviously these mga micro businesses, income
even,
nila, income nila is not
yung
that
mga
big,
nagbebenta lang sa sidewalks, yung mga maliliit na booths, yung mga
stall
yes,
owners,
or small carinderias,
Yeah.
do they have to file income tax returns?
There is a revenue regulation issued actually this year. That's what yung marginalized income earners. Yes, they have to file, but they are exempt from percentage tax. So
By
yes,
percentage tax, what taxes are these?
percentage tax is actually a sales tax. No?
Sales tax,
It's
parang
also
VAT, parang ganun.
nasa National Internal Revenue Code din yun, but they are exempt from paying it since they are considered as marginalized income earners.
Okay.
But they have to file income tax
Yes.
and pay the income tax.
Yes.
How do you define though? How do you classify one as marginalized, the other one being a small
Or micro
business, a micro business?
Well, that issuance was issued. It specifically mentioned that its gross sales or gross income must not exceed 100,000 in a given month.
In a given month. So pagka, kunwari,
Year yata.
100,000
A year.
A year.
A year. 100,000. I was thinking, parang ang laki rin nun.
Oh, 100,000
So,
a year.
dapat 100,000 for the whole year. They should not have exceeded 100,000
Correct.
pesos. Okay, so they can be considered either a marginalized income earner or a micro business. And then, Depcom Nelson, I've noticed, of course, pag bandang last year, November, December, there were so many bazaars. And I've bought in some bazaars na there were no receipts issued to me. For these bazaars that sold and made income, do they also have to file income tax returns?
Yeah, those who qualified as changi or bazaars, they are required to file an income tax return. But unlike that of a businessman or a professional, the ITR form is Form 1700 at the end of the year. Now, let me just explain the definition or the concept of a bazaar. It's one who engages into a livelihood in not more than 15 days in a year. If it is more than 15 days already, then that person, that party ceases to be a bazaar or a tiange or a privileged store. Although it's still in a privileged store status, nonetheless, these persons are required by law to issue invoices or official receipts as the case may be. But considering that they don't have the capability of procuring so many invoices, etc., it's the organizer of the bazaar or the tiangi who's got to give them or distribute to them these invoices or receipts.
So if you buy from a bazaar and you don't get a receipt, you can report the stall or the bazaar organizer.
Yes, that would be a big help to the campaign of the BIR.
I see. Okay. Now, what are the penalties naman? No? I think for a lot of people, they sometimes tend to, kind of brush this aside. Okay lang yan kasi, if I don't get caught anyway, and even if I get caught, the chances of me going to jail might be is slim to none. No? Is this true, Depcom? And maybe I can ask also Attorney Rom. No? First, let's go to the penalties. What sort of penalties are we looking at for maybe late filing or perhaps non-filing or the payment of the wrong taxes?
For non-filing of income tax returns, once we discover, of course, firstly, these civil penalties that of assessing and enforcing the collection of the basic tax, plus surcharge of either 25% or 50% of the amount of tax to be paid, plus interest of 20% per annum. And then there's a fourth amount, which is, of course, consensual or optional on the part of the taxpayer to pay, and that's what we call suggested compromise fee. Compromise fee in lieu of criminal prosecution. So if this amount is not paid by the taxpayer, the BIR has the option to go to court and charge him for the criminal violation.
Yeah, and there is, you're looking at real jail time here. I mean,
You can go to prison.
You can go to prison.
Yes, yes, yes. And that's one of those, among the cases filed under the Run After Tax Evaders program.
And then, I'm curious, how do you know that it's the official compromise fee that's being asked of you? Because before, I've heard rumors na sometimes merong lalapit na either from the BIR, baka naman nagpapanggap lang na from the BIR, and then you audit sila and they'll say, you have to pay us a settlement fee. But based on DepCom's explanation, meron talagang what you call a compromise fee in order not to go into the criminal prosecution aspect of not paying or being delayed in the payment of taxes. But how do you know that this is officially from the BIR na compromise fee allowed by law?
Assuming that the taxpayer goes to the BIR office to file not on the date set but rather late. So it is our standard operating procedure that before the bank would receive the return and the payments, statement of the penalties, including probably the suggested compromise fee, would be there in
an official BIR
we
document,
call that,
right?
if it is a return, then we have a space for the suggested compromise fee. It's a suggested compromise fee.
That's very helpful. So pagka meron lumalapit lang and orally lang sinasabi na, magbayad ka ng ganitong amount para hindi na kayo ma-assess or ma-prosecute, that's a red flag na hindi to official.
Yeah, we have an issuance, we call that a Revenue Memorandum Order, RMO, and that could be searched through our website. I just don't know the exact number of that RMO. It contains a schedule of the compromise fee, the suggested compromise fee of criminal prosecution, depending on the violation.
Okay.
But
Very
not
helpful.
all cases can be compromised, those involving frauds, etc.
Fraud, meaning anong example po ng fraud?
Well,
If you misdeclare, is that fraud? Kung liniitan mo yung amount ng
Not
income?
necessarily. There's got to be a pattern established for quite some time that really there is a design or sort of an ulterior motive on the part of the taxpayer to really deprive the government of much needed revenue.
Now, let's talk about the prescriptive periods, Attorney Rom. Maybe we can discuss this. For example, I filed my return, let's say in 2002, for example. Can the BIR still go after me later on? Let's say there was a misdeclaration or an underdeclaration of income. And I mean, what are the prescriptive periods we're looking at?
The rule is 3 years from the time of filing. But in case of fraud, that is 10 years upon discovery.
Upon discovery. Okay. So it's not from the filing.
No.
Okay.
So if, for instance, you did not declare income 2 years ago, and then the BIR discovers that you had income 2 years ago, they have 10 years to still
From the time of
prosecute you for
discovery.
that.
In cases of fraud, usually.
Okay.
Okay.
And then another question would be, if it's your first time to earn something, a taxable income last year, and you still don't have a TIN, what goes first? Can you already file an income tax return and then apply for a TIN then and there? Or what's the process that should be followed?
We say that the TIN is required before any person could pay any internal revenue tax. So it is incumbent upon payers of income payments to ask the payee what his tax identification number is.
Okay.
And the tax identification number is the start of the registration of the taxpayer with the BIR.
I see.
Okay, so the
that's good.
TIN does not, the tax identification number will never change. Once you get your TIN number, it will be forever.
Yes,
Magbabago.
yes. Unless, of course, we change the system, but it's not forthcoming.
Now, I have a question regarding sa mga OFWs natin. No? Obviously, they're abroad, and it's tough for them to physically file their own ITR. Ano yung rules when it comes to OFWs who are earning abroad? Yeah. DEPCOM or?
Okay. Those who are considered overseas Filipinos or even the complements of foreign vessels, they are not required to file because they are exempt from income tax under the law.
Okay.
But however, Filipino residents, resident Filipinos, but they are earning abroad, either as professionals or businessmen, they ought to pay, they ought to declare their earnings abroad here in our country.
Now, how do you define a resident? Because sometimes, for example, for some people, they might be residents abroad. I mean, technically, they have a residency abroad, but they're physically present here for, let's say, 100 days, 150 days, or more than half the time of the year. So how do you define that?
Well, there are 365 days in a year. It's stay here or there of 183 days.
183, meaning
Yeah,
parang a little over
50% plus 1. So
In which case, you could then
that's
be
the
called
gains.
a resident
Yes.
for tax purposes.
Except, of course, these OFWs and complements of foreign vessels.
Yung
who
mga
are
nagtatrabaho
under the
sa
law.
mga ships.
Even if they stay only for 5 months there, their income for that 5 months is under the law exempt.
Right, okay. Okay, we still have a couple of questions from our viewers. Let's continue answering them with the help of our guests. Lee is asking, I have been working abroad since late of 2010, since I work overseas. I've stopped filing for my income tax return, and just this year, I've acquired permanent residency status from the country I'm working. Am I correct in not filing for my income tax return? I do not want to come back to the country and be filed for tax evasion or some case to that effect. So, naging permanent resident na siya abroad.
No more. There is no need because it's no longer
Under the tax jurisdiction.
resident. But however, let me just have a word of caution. If he has got a business activity here or has left some income earning property, say apartments for rent, etc., well, there is still a need to file an income tax return.
For those income coming from
Yes,
the
yeah,
properties here in the Philippines. Our next question is from Marco. I have 2 TIN numbers, one from a business that closed due to bankruptcy and another for employment. Which one should I use to file for my taxes this coming April 15?
In the first place, having more than one tax identification number is a violation of the National Internal Revenue Code. That is punishable. It is a criminal offense. So what should be done there is surrender the latter one.
Just to clarify on that, DEPCOM, yung TAN before, there was a tax account number and then a tax identification number eventually, yun ang nag-replace, no? There are some people who had TANs before and then now have TINs. Could there be problems there, or the BAR has a system that identifies
The TAN, the TAN, has been abandoned, abrogated. And we know that that is TAN because it contains the birth date of
the person?
the person.
Okay.
Now it's no longer there.
No, okay. All right. So now this time, Alexis is asking us, I'm a working student employed at a call center as a part-timer. My rate is 69 pesos per hour for 5 hours, 5 days a week. The accounting department said that my salary is taxable since they based the rate from the basic pay of regular employees, which is 12,000 a month. Is this correct? We raised the issue with them, but they only told us that since our salary is at the 12K mark, it is taxable. Maybe Attorney Ram?
Minimum wage earners are not taxable.
Okay.
I mean, they are not required. They are not required that the employers are not required to withhold any income tax from them. But for a 12,000 salary, yes, they are taxable.
They are taxable.
Because it's over the
minimum wage.
Okay. So they still have to pay taxes.
And again, just for the information of our viewers, the minimum wage being
That's I think
480 yata.
64
per day.
For Metro
For Metro
Manila.
Manila.
Metro Manila.
Okay.
Our next question is from Eunice. I resigned from my company last August 2013, but I'm still working for them as a part-time employee on a per-day basis. Tax was still deducted from my daily wage. My question is, should I receive a tax refund? I'm confused as to how they do their computations.
Well, it doesn't matter whether one is a regular employee or is working on a daily basis. So long as your take or salary or compensation is beyond the minimum wage level, I think we have to consider taxation.
Now, just a quick one, and this is regarding situs. Now, we all know that taxes, let's say, especially when it comes to services, is based on where the service is performed. Right? In the world of internet, online, now sometimes some people, let's say, there's some online companies that are registered in Delaware or maybe in Singapore, but the actual service is done here, or perhaps even somewhere else. How does the BAR, what is the position of the BAR when it comes to that, determining the situs of the tax, whether something is taxable, especially in relation to online activities?
We simply follow the law. It's where the service is rendered. For instance,
where the service is rendered.
Yeah, we have resorts in many places in the country, say Boracay, Bohol, etc. Yeah. But bookings are made outside the country.
Mm-hmm. But the service is rendered here.
Yeah, and fees or the fees go to the resort or to the hotels, and we simply ask the hotels to take a part of what they earn, what is paid to them, as withholding tax to the non-resident.
So the rule is where the service is rendered.
Yes.
What about for residents of the Philippines? So if you're a Filipino and you're residing in the Philippines, but then you deliver work, for instance, for blogs, you write a blog here, but it's actually for a foreign website. How do you consider that income? Do you have to pay taxes for that?
Maybe we could relate that to the activities rendered by business processing offices here, BPOs or call centers rendering services to foreign clients. For that purposes, we take them as in concept of exports, 0%. But considering that the service is rendered here, we still impose the income tax.
And lastly, for those living here or residents here but are not Filipinos, kasama na yung mga those that are, Filipinos by ethnicity, but then either American citizens or other citizenship, do they have to pay and file their income tax returns?
Yes, resident aliens are taxable within. So, with respect to the income they receive here in the Philippines, they have to file their income tax return.
Regular.
Okay. So walang lusot. Even if you're not a Filipino, you really have to pay your income taxes if you're residing here.
We do have a recap, a quick recap lang, but the general rule is basically, of course, for all those who are deriving income, whether it's professional or through sales, diba? Sale of, I guess, your capital assets, and even your goods and services. No? The general rule is if you have income coming in, you have to file your ITR, income tax return. It's most ideal to actually tap an accountant to help you in that. No? But there are certain, income earners, a certain level of income earners where an ITR is not required, and that is which ano yung cap?
Marginalized.
Yung mga marginalized, those not earning more than 100,000 a year.
And also if you're not earning over the personal exemption, which is 50,000 pesos, then you really don't have to file an income tax return. And then, of course, another important thing that we have to remind you, even if you're still a minor, even if you're a child, as long as you earn income, you have to pay income tax and file an income tax return. And then, even if you're a foreigner, if you're a resident here in the Philippines or earning income from the Philippines, you have to file income tax return. And the deadline is already next week. It's April 15.
All right.
And then, of course, penalties, sir. Remind them
of the penalties.
Firstly, that of filing on April 15 or even April 14 is already very inconvenient. now that we are implementing a new mode of receiving income tax returns other than those filing electronically. Right now, we're taking off the stamping system. Rather, even the non-payable returns are required to be received through our mobile revenue collection office systems, which is a machine receiving, a return receiving machine, which of course being piloted right now. It's a move to make the filing of returns and encoding of the data thereon in real time.
Easier.
To avoid some sort of antedating or whatever.
All right.
And the penalty, of course, for non-filing is if there is a tax payable, aside from the basic tax, we have the surcharge, which is either at 25 or 50% of the tax, plus 20% interest per annum, and a possible criminal prosecution or the payment of the compromise fee based on certain tables. Again, I have to advise our taxpayers to, well, tomorrow we still have time, but don't use the mañana habit until such time that it's already April 15. Again, we say that it will be a long line at the filing centers come April 15. And of course, all the BIR needs is the payment of the correct amount of income tax as an added service. Those who are paying more than 2,000 may elect to file the amount in 2 installments, one at the time of filing and the other one on or before July 15, 2014. And that's in the case of individuals, either as employees or those who are engaged in trade or business or practice or profession.
Okay.
Alright.
Thank you for mentioning that. Meron palang installment payments sa BIR. One at the time of the filing and next before July 2014.
15.
2015.
15, okay. And Attorney Rom, any quick tips to mga taxpayers?
One should definitely know their obligation, as well as their rights. Definitely.
2014, right?
All right. Okay.
Kumuha lang ka mo ng
All right. That is all the time that we have for tonight. We would like to thank our guests, Commissioner Nelson Aspe of the BIR and Attorney Romulus Tatel of Vincent's Chattel Law Office. I'm Attorney Rod Nepomuceno.
And I'm Attorney Karen Jimeno. If you have any questions or comments on our topic for tonight, you may share them on our Facebook and Twitter pages. You can also download the Solar News mobile app on your Android and iOS devices to watch Legal Help Desk via live streaming and catch up on episodes you may have missed. Join us again next Monday as we discuss your legal rights. Good night.
This we may exemplify by means of, like for example, the proceeds from life insurance. This will still denote the concept of
Income.
a flow of wealth coming to a person, but that is excluded, okay, by law. Okay, another example will be the
When you say
inheritance.
excluded, it's not included in the computation of income that's going to be taxable.
Yes,
All right.
yes.
Right.
Another example is the device or the gift that one receives. Okay, so that property or cash that is received, although a flow of wealth, okay, will not really be considered as taxable. Okay, that is expressly provided under our law. Well,
Not taxable as income, but
Not
taxable
taxable as
by
income.
as
As a donation.
as
Yeah.
a donation, but the person who will be made liable for that will not be the recipient of the gift, okay, or inheritance. It is another national tax. Okay, that will not, of course, be the subject.
So in
of
other words,
this.
for those people, for instance, that received inheritance last year and
Yes.
gained, like for instance, an additional 50,000 or 1 million pesos from an inheritance, they don't have to report that for income tax purposes.
No, it
but
is
they have to
excluded.
make sure they pay either real estate tax.
Yes.
Okay. And what about in terms of age? So if you earn income and you're below 18, you're still a minor, do you still have to file an income tax return? DepCom, Nelson.
Yeah, yung mga child stars, yung mga child
Or
celebrities,
even those who,
mga
sometimes
namumodel.
you have high school students who work during the summers or they write part-time for other
You have small
other
businesses.
Yes,
Yeah.
and then they get income from that. Lalo na yung mga bloggers, for instance.
Yeah.
Will they have to file an income tax return? The month of April has been dreaded by many, if not most, tax-paying citizens, as it is the month when they all register, file, and pay for their taxes.
Register, file, and pay.
But like it or not, it is important for everyone to pay their correct and true taxes. Under Section 2 of the Tax Reform Act of 1997, in order to provide for the needs of those under its jurisdiction and care, the government has to promote sustainable economic growth through the rationalization of the Philippine Internal Revenue Tax System.
All of us should pull our weight. We should do our bit, which is what the law requires, pay the right taxes.
Parati kong sinasabi, dalawang obligasyon ng tao. No? First, magbayad kayo ng tama. Second, bantayan nyo kung saan pumupunta yung buwis nyo. Hindi nyo pwedeng sabihin nyo, hindi nyo binabantayan, kaya ayaw nyo magbayad. Para sa akin, wala akong karapatan magreklamo ang isang tao kung hindi sila sumusunod sa batas. Di ba?
With the money collected from our taxes, the government uses these to build infrastructures such as ports, roads, and pedestrian footbridges, and provide services such as medical, an internet or an online site. If you receive income from that, even if they're not your employers per se, do you have to pay income tax and report that to the BIR?
Well, anybody who derives income from any activity is required to file and pay an income tax as a general rule.
Now, does it apply for, let's say, ano yung minimum income, or I guess what we call a cap, no? There's a certain group of people whose earnings in a year don't reach a certain amount and they don't need to file an ITR. Ano yung amount na yun?
Yung pong hindi umabot doon sa personal exemption yung kanilang kinikita.
Magkano
Ang
po
personal
yung
exemption natin ay 50,000.
50,000.
per
So
person.
if, for instance, last year, someone earns 20,000, 30,000 pesos, they don't have to file an income tax return.
Kung yung pong rule na yun ang gagamitin natin, yes, hindi na kailangan. Pero balikan natin, if that guy has been telling the world that he is engaged in trade or business or practice of profession, he still have the duty to file an income tax.
Regardless if his income does not reach 50,000
Yes,
pesos.
yes.
Attorney Noel, there are certain terms, no? Exemptions and then deductions. Can we, again, for those who are watching or not too familiar with tax accounting, can you explain how these exemptions and deductions work for their benefit?
Yes, when we talk about exemptions, well, this will still denote items of receipt, although the law would recognize them as excluded in the computation for the gross income.
Care and social needs. However, there are some people who still do not know how to register, file, and pay for their taxes.
They don't want to file, it's up to them. Then we will catch them and then we will file criminal case against them. They're supposed to be more intelligent because they can use the online facility, supposedly. But don't tell me they're not as intelligent as the other people who go through that same process. Kung ayaw, talagang maraming dahilan.
What are the steps for registering, filing, and paying for taxes? Who are required to file for their income taxes? If individuals do not file for their income taxes on time, What are the penalties they face? Good evening. You are watching Legal Help Desk on the Solar News channel. This show is about making the law work for you by giving legal advice on topics that matter to you. I'm Attorney Jimeno.
And I'm Attorney Nepomuceno. Tonight, we will discuss your legal rights on income tax returns, what you need to know on how to compute for your taxes, and what you need to do when filing for income tax returns.
Our guests for tonight are Commissioner Nelson Aspe of the Bureau of Internal Revenue, or BIR, and Attorney Noel Ortega, Professor and National Bar Reviewer in Taxation at the San Sebastian College, Recoletos. Good evening and thank you for being with us, gentlemen.
Good evening, DEPCOM, Nelson, and of course, Attorney Noel. Yeah. So this is very timely.
Yes, it's tax season
it's
again.
tax season.
Yeah.
And so we decided that it'll be appropriate to be tackling taxes, in particular income tax. No? So I guess to first start off the show, obviously we're going to be filing our income tax returns on April 15th for those who haven't done it. Maybe we start off with the definition of income. Maybe DEPCOM, maybe we should start with that. I mean, how do we compute for income?
Yeah,
Before we then compute
income
for
that is taxable.
Taxable, yeah.
Well, generally, income is what we call a flow of wealth as differentiated from a return of capital. So in the case of those who are engaged in trade or business or practice of profession, income there to be taxable means the gross selling price less the cost of doing business, and that includes cost of sales and the operating marketing expenses, arriving at what we call net income. So for tax purposes, for income tax purposes, the individual who is a businessman is entitled into the so-called additional exemptions on top of the personal exemptions. But in the case of corporations, the net income is the one subject to the corporate income tax rate, save, of course, certain items which are excluded from income.
DEPCOM Nelson, I think one of the common misconceptions is that if you're not really employed with a company or wala kang employer, if this is not your normal business, that you really don't have to pay taxes. But can you clarify? For instance, if you're selling something either over the internet or to a friend, and then you were paid for selling either your second-hand items or anything that, or your services. For instance, you wrote something online for